G'day. Trooper Cody and Steve, and I'm a bit unsure how to describe this because this is the most complicated video we've ever attempted, and I'm not sure how well I'm going to be able to explain it. It is a request from one of my subscribers, and when it was made it seemed so simple. I had a request a while back, what did the blokes do for toilet paper? It ended up being a great video about disease and hygiene and Gallipoli. So this one was the simple question, how much did the Australians get paid when they were in the First World War? And once I started delving into this, it was fascinating, but by gosh, it was complicated. So we'll start off by saying most people know, if you've got the slightest interest in World War I, that Australian troops were called 6 bob tourists. That's because they got paid 6 shillings a day in World War I. Now in 1914, when they got paid 6 shillings a day, that was slightly under what was classed the average wage for an Australian. Now you might think that that isn't very good. It's less than the basic wage. The point is, 1914, whether you were German, French, Belgian, Turkish, didn't matter what, Russian, English, Welsh, you didn't join to get paid. You joined because it was your expected patriotic duty, nothing to do with the money. And so, when the Australians joined up and got 6 bob a day, it was a fortune compared to the other countries. When we talk about the other countries, though, in a minute, how do you compare cars and boats? How do you compare things that are completely different? So America joined the war in 1917. So when I talk about America, the United States, remember we sort of skipped to 1917, but everyone else I talk about, which is going to be New Zealand, Canada, Germany and France, is all in 1914, and England. So when Australians were called 6 bob tourists, that is because they got paid so much more than all the other armed forces. There was a lot of resentment. So many things I have to try and describe in this video. So the first thing is, if you look today at what an Australian dollar is worth versus the English pound, you can't compare because the exchange rate is enormously different. We are talking 1914. The Australian pound and the English pound was pegged penny for penny. It was exactly the same. So when an English soldier was paid 1 shilling and 1 penny a day, an Australian soldier was paid 6 shillings, almost 6 times what an English soldier was paid. Nobody liked to be a military policeman because you were hated. If you were a private in the English military police, you immediately jumped from 1 shilling and 1 penny to 2 shillings and 2 pennies. That was to encourage people to go there, because nobody liked, in modern terminology, nobody liked the toe cutter, nobody liked a policeman from within the ranks. So you got 2 shillings and 2pence. So when those red caps were policing Aussies in the Middle East, they were getting paid 2 shillings and 2pence, knowing the Aussies were getting 6 shillings a day. What were the other countries being paid so that we can compare that? If I say that England and Australia, the money was exactly the same, and the English were getting 1 shilling and 1 penny, Australians 6 shillings, what were the other countries getting? So back in the 1800s, Canada, Commonwealth, province, all part of the English Empire, British Empire, they decided they were going to do far more trade with the United States of America than with Europe. So they decided in the 1800s to go to the dollar, dollars and cents, to match America. They also decided in 1914, this still applies, that the Canadian dollar would not be the same as an American dollar. So if you had one American dollar, you had $1.10 Canadian. Talking about Canada at the moment, what did the Canadian soldiers get paid in 1914? In Canadian money, they got $1.10. It's just a coincidence that it's the same as an American $1, but they got paid $1.10 a day. Now, you have to compare the Canadian dollar to the English pound so that you can work out if you had $20 Canadian, how many pounds, shillings and pence would you get? So the Canadians in 1914 were paid 4 shillings. That's still pretty good money, and it's 4 times what the English privates were getting. Keeping it to the equivalent of British money, to compare it directly with the Australians, the New Zealanders were getting 2 shillings and 6pence. The thing about New Zealand was it went into the war very poor. That was because New Zealand had a policy that if you earned less than £300 a year, you would not pay a penny to the government for any sort of tax. Your income was yours to keep. £300. What does that mean? Well, I'm pleased you asked, because in New Zealand in 1914, if you had a successful plumbing business and were doing well and you were middle class, in 1914 you were earning £150 a year, and yet you paid no tax whatsoever, right up to £300. New Zealand was very poor. How could they afford to pay 2 and 6 for their soldiers? Because Britain said to them, we promise you, from today, ever forth, forever, we will buy all the meat you can grow. Grow the sheep, grow it, freeze it, send it to us, and we will buy it, not just while the war's on, but forever. That was the big incentive to New Zealand to get into the war. Patriotic duty as well, but you had to think about how were they ever going to get their money back, so that was the hope. So we've talked about the English money, Australians, the Canadians and the New Zealanders. In 1917, when the Americans came into the war, they were also getting paid $1 a day in 1917, and that again equated to about 4 shillings. So you can see the British were pretty unhappy because they only got 1 shilling and a penny. What you've got to be fair about with the English, they had a fantastic proficiency system set up, and basically once you got proficient in shooting, machine gunning, making saddles, you got extra money, and that ranged from 3pence to 6pence per day depending on the proficiency. It was also very easy to become a lance corporal and then again get a few extra pennies a day through doing that. So we've talked about the English speaking, if you want to say, as long as I don't upset any Canadians by saying the English speaking. But what about the French? They were on our side. What did the French get? So the French, a French soldier in 1914 got 55 francs. They still called it francs back then in 1914, 55 francs. So again, you then have to say, great, 55 francs a month. Sorry, 55 francs a month. What's that mean? Convert it to English pounds, shillings, pence at the day. They were getting a little under 2 shillings. About 1 shilling and 9pence per day for a French private. And of course, here's the big one. What were the Germans on the other side getting paid? So shortly before the war, a new monetary system was introduced in Germany. And to my German viewers and people that speak German, another one of my apologies for my appalling pronunciation of these things. But it was called the paper mark. It was spelt P-A-P-I-E-R, mark. Translates to paper mark. One paper mark was 100, I can't pronounce it, but it's the German word for pennies. 100 German pennies was in one paper mark. The guys got paid 60 paper marks a month, a little more. So 60 paper marks a month, which was the equivalent to about 2 shillings and a penny. So we know what those blokes got paid. How does that correlate to today? Now you see, yet again, if you were a conspiracy theorist, you'd say they've done this deliberately. And the reason is, you have to look at two things. You have to look at inflation, and you also have to look at buying power. So when you look at inflation, and you only count inflation, 1 English pound in 1914, today, 2022, that is worth 120 pounds sterling. Going by inflation. In Australia, if you go by inflation, $1, which you've got to remember when we went from pounds, shillings and pence in the 60s, £1 became $2. So today, we're talking now about Australia's inflation rate, and what it equates to is that a dollar equivalent, 10 shillings, in 1914, with Australian inflation, is only $60. And you might think to yourself, that doesn't sound right. Surely it would be a lot more than $60. And what it is basically because we have had a pretty good, pretty stable country. We've done really well. So we don't have a very disadvantaged inflation rate from 1914. To give you an example though, what it is all about is the buying power of your money. And what that means is that in 1914, you could go into a pub in Australia and you could buy a pint of beer for threepence. 3 pennies would buy you a pint of beer. If you use inflation only on that pint of beer in a pub, today in Australia you should be at any front bar of a pub and lay down 65 cents to get a pint of beer. You can't. It's $8.50 for a pint of beer in Australia. And that shows you that you can't just go by the inflation rate. You have to see what the buying power is. And if you can understand what I'm saying, it's basically your £100 in 1914 bought you a whole heap more than your $200 will buy you in 2022 in Australia. Okay, I hope that video has made some sense. It's without doubt the most complicated and difficult video I've had to make, from statistics and trying to explain different currencies and different inflation rates versus the buying power of money. Hope it's made sense. Share it around. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Don't you forget to subscribe if you haven't. Thank you.